Okay, we got to work out this Providence situation.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Holy moly, has it been a week for the Providence, city of Providence, and the schools, and those two things aren't separable. You know, this is right now the conversation in the city and the state about the city, and well, it should be, because as the school systems go, so go every municipality in this state, and as the city of Providence goes, so goes the state of Rhode Island. And what's interesting about that is that not enough people believe that. But it's true. And all you have to do, those of you who are so provincial, you know, all the way down there in North Kingstown, and you don't drive up to Providence, you know, and you don't really care about them people, but a bunch of your paycheck goes to support it. I hate to break it to you. You got to pay attention to what's going on in the city. And to the new Ed Commissioner's credit, she is suggesting that everybody in the state can have a role in the conversation about what should happen there. If you've been living under a rock, or you've been out of town, or you're new to the Dan York State of Mind because you're in a hotel room, put your feet up, trying to regroup, here is, I know where you all are, by the way. I know where you all are. Here's a headline that reflects the complete choreographed stupid show that happened at the governor's State House room the other day. And here's the package from Wednesday's development.
There's no disputing the findings in a scathing report on Providence Public Schools.
The system is broken, and the Providence Public Schools are in crisis.
We need to get to the core of the challenges. We need transformational change.
Everyone is responsible because we all knew what was happening.
Researchers from Johns Hopkins University Institute for Education Policy spent time at 12 city schools and found very little learning going on. Students instead talking on their phones, teachers reportedly not feeling safe, and buildings not even safe to be in. City and state leaders have an enormous task at hand. But on day one of making change, they were short of explaining what exactly will be done.
There's going to be a lot of questions. Whose fault is this? Who do we blame? I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on what do we have to do to get better.
Mayor Jorge Alorza could not say yet if anyone will be fired, adding that the thick teacher contracts pose a roadblock in making real change.
There are forces that preserve the status quo that are just too strong. And that's what makes it so appealing to have some kind of partnership with the state.
He's talking about the union. That's all he's talking about there. And he's the biggest phony baloney on the planet. And as I said last night, in a pretty direct way, he's got to go. From the process, he's got to go. But rather than opine, which I can do on this because I'm revved up on it, I'd rather pick the smartest brain in the room here on it, and that is Dan McGowan, formerly of WPRI.com. And, that was a quick. You're on.
Hello.
And I'm on.
Good to see you again.
And we are on. Now Danny is now running the Boston Globe, the entire paper. He just took over the whole operation.
How am I doing?
You know, great coup. No, but you are one of the three key writers and a lead player in the organization of what is now the Boston Globe's Rhode Island. What?
Bureau coverage.
Yes.
Entity.
Thing. And you're doing well with it.
Thank you.
It seems like it's right. You guys have hit your marks.
Off to a really good start.
Although my buddy Tom Ward from the Valley Breeze the other day said to me that he didn't think it would work because it doesn't say Providence or Rhode Island in it.
Yeah, I would push back. I would say if you look above the fold in BostonGlobe.com right now, you see Rhode Island. A lot of people are clicking on it. But I have a lot of respect for Tom, and you know, we have to prove ourselves.
Yeah, he was certainly supportive of you and your efforts, but didn't think in the long run it would resonate. I have a funny feeling that people aren't stupid in Rhode Island, and they see the Providence Journal's struggle and de-investment in content, which is what was probably viewed as the Boston Globe's opportunity, right?
I'd like to believe they just loved me.
Or that. Or that.
Of course, I'm kidding.
Couple of things. Give me your executive summary, rather before I start probing in directions that may or may not be comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I said this to you on the radio the other day. I think this was the most comprehensive look at a problem that just about everybody knew existed. If you were to go bullet point by bullet point through some of the problems raised here, probably say you and I have talked about this for years, right? Various things, whether it's the conditions of the schools, whether it's the test scores, things like that. This put it all into one place. I think it lays the groundwork for potentially serious change that the commissioner wants to set forth with. But there's a lot of work to do, and there are a lot of forces that are going to get in the way of this. And so I think it's a first step that starts a good conversation, but they got a lot of work to do.
Let me establish something. Jess, if you can roll me Mayor Lorza from the radio this morning on Gene's show. This is like too much.
As this report makes clear, we don't need nipping at the margins. We need something that gets to the core, and we just don't have the power to do that. That's where this partnership with the state comes from, and that's why we asked RIDE to put together this report. Our kids should be guaranteed a top-quality education, and we haven't been doing that for decades in the city of Providence. That's why, born out of that frustration, we asked RIDE to get involved. There's a lot of risk and a lot of uncertainty involved, but I tell you why calling on the state and calling on RIDE to produce this report was an easy decision for me.
As my father, God rest his soul, would say to me when I say, "Hey, Dad, we ought to," he would say, "What is this we blank?"
Yeah.
What is this we blank?
Right.
That's a bold-faced lie.
It is not accurate to say that Providence called on anybody to do this. I think Providence, I think to be clear, the mayor, there's no question, understood that there were real challenges, but I will tell you.
Yeah, after you repeat it 3 times, slowly.
That's right. I think.
Seriously.
Yeah. I do think this was led by the state. There is no question. Now, in the end, did they come together? And you'll remember about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, they held a press conference, governor, mayor together, we're going to do this together. Yeah, there's a partnership there. The partnership is a forced partnership. And so, yeah, it is, I would say from my reporting, it is not accurate.
The new commissioner wanted it.
That's right. That's right.
The new commissioner wanted the landscape. She wanted to know where she was getting into.
Right. And I'll tell you this, by the way, the state wanted to do this as a result, a direct result of the superintendent in Providence deciding to step away. They saw this as a moment in time to pretend they knew who their commissioner was going to be.
So the state being the governor, and the new ed commissioner.
And the incoming commissioner.
Right.
By the way, also, there are other people at RIDE who were involved in this in various ways.
Sure, but this is not the brainstorm and the ask of the mayor of Providence.
It is absolutely not.
He is lying about this.
I should say.
Which adds, by the way, to the reasons why he's got to go. The first one was contained in the Boston Globe report by Dan McGowan when you pursued him after Angelica Infante Green, our new commissioner, suggested she would not send her children to the City of Providence schools. You asked this mayor for a grade, and he came up with a
C,
which is another reason that he should be asked to leave.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, going back just a year ago when he's running for mayor and was talking a lot about schools. I wonder if on the campaign trail he would have graded the Providence schools a C.
Let me double check a couple things. Did he apologize when this all came down Wednesday afternoon at the State House?
No.
Did he take personal responsibility when this all came down at the State House?
No. Now,
is he the CEO of the city?
He is the CEO, and according to this report, is very hands-on in the Providence School Department.
And in fact, on his own, in addition to the decades of decay that everyone has to admit exists, he has been quite known as a micromanager of the system, including but not limited to interviewing people that would report to the superintendent. Probably one of the frustrations of the former superintendent, Chris Moore, leaving.
Yes, I would say that would be one of the reasons why the superintendent did decide to move on. There's no question. The mayor admits it. He likes to interview non-union employees.
And this governor has the unmitigated gall to be somewhat of a, Trojan horse champion here when she just signed an evergreen contract, which forces the terms of current contracts to exist until they're changed, correct?
Yeah, particularly around the salary and benefits, yes.
This
yeah.
thick contract in Providence
Right.
now can't be moved around until a new one.
Although, and here's where the mayor can slide on this, he is supportive of the state taking some sort of intervention here, and the reason why is under current law right now, the state has the ability to reconstitute a school district that is failing. By reconstituting a school district, there's an argument that you could blow up a contract and have a new conversation. So the mayor is supportive of that
we
idea.
have to talk about the statutory issues there, and we
Yes.
shall when we come back. But here's the final thing I wanted to double check on in terms of the event the other day. Governor had the unmitigated gall to suggest that she knew things were bad, but she didn't know how bad.
Yeah.
You believe that?
I'd be stunned to think
She didn't know
that-
there were rats? She didn't know there was asbestos? She didn't know there were security issues? She didn't know that people felt unsafe? She didn't know that 90% of the kids weren't on par? She didn't know any of those things?
She's not watching enough Dan York State of Mind.
She's not reading enough Boston Globe.
Agreed.
We'll be right back. So last night was the first of what are 8 pretty well tightly scheduled community meetings that the commissioner, the new commissioner, held. I was hanging out watching a good portion of this. Here's how Eyewitness News reported it.
Our buildings are crumbling. Teachers and students do not feel safe in our schools. That's what a broken system looks like. Eso es lo que un sistema roto se ve. ¿Cómo se ve?
One day after the sobering Johns Hopkins report on the Providence public school system is released, Rhode Island's new education commissioner hears concerns straight from parents.
I am begging the State Department of Education to take over the Providence schools. Outside reviewers from Johns Hopkins had to come in here and be shocked and horrified to the point of tears about what they saw before we're all here.
Some spoke up begging for change, saying officials can no longer say they didn't realize what was going on.
And now no one can claim ignorance. And now the state also needs to take responsibility.
From academics to discipline, the report describes the district as one that is struggling from top to bottom. Parents at the meeting brought up cell phone usage multiple times, shocked at what the research found. In the report, one person said, quote, "There's no penalty for being on a phone. At least 10 phones are out in my class every day. They're FaceTiming and watching Netflix in the classroom with no headphones."
While students vape in class and goof off on their phones.
More tech in our schools is not the answer.
The president of the Providence Teachers Union says educators are well aware of the problem.
There are a lot of teachers in this room right now. So I need for teachers who are in this room who struggle every single day with technology in your classrooms and asking and begging and pleading for students to put technology away, to please clap.
So funny, when she started on the technology thing, I was thinking she doesn't want technology? It's just this, the phone.
Cell phone.
Did I leave my phone? Actually, now I'm starting to feel nervous because I don't have my phone at the end of my hand. I'm good, Anita. No, seriously. We're all like that now, right? Oh, geez. Oh.
If I was in a classroom,
The kids, literally, it's a third appendage.
Oh, yeah. Doesn't even, yeah.
But you can imagine how disconcerting it is to be having to battle that all the time, and flipping you off, watching Netflix, doing what they're doing.
Right.
This commissioner, what's your take so far?
I think she has been as direct as you could ask for. It reminds me a little bit of Commissioner Gist from several years ago. In fact, this whole sort of bubbling up of what are we going to do about Providence, the only time I can remember anyone being this galvanized on education was at 2010 Race to the Top, when you had lawmakers on board, the business community on board, when you're trying to get a bunch of federal money, and then quickly all of that falls apart. This reminds me of the same situation. I'm curious to see if she has maybe a better outcome than Commissioner Gist.
Well, this is a much more acute crisis. She's going to have a really interesting computation on her hands here. First of all, I firmly believe that she doesn't have until Labor Day to set the tone for this whole thing.
I agree.
And she has to the 4th of July, as far as I'm concerned, to just say, look, I know where we're going, and we're stepping in.
Right. And they do, by the way.
But she needs to formalize that.
Yeah.
To go through the shenanigans of 6 or 7 or 8 meetings,
right.
She should establish that and then use these meetings to cultivate the the state-specific plan.
That's
Because
right.
although there's existing statute that allows for the state to come in, I'm not certain about this contract busting and everything and all of this kind of a thing.
Well, it's untested, and so that's the thing. Is I think the belief is that if you reconstitute a district, which is what the phrase that would be used, potentially you could blow up a contract. Never been tested, so we don't know.
I don't know what the receivership I don't know what the receivership value is on the school sides versus the municipal side. Meaning,
Right.
when you bankrupt the town or you send into receivership, all bets are off.
That's
all
right.
contracts are nullified. There's
Right.
precedent for that.
That's right.
And I'm not saying that the contract has to be blown up either, necessarily. But this is the interesting play. And tomorrow night we have Mary Beth Calabro, the
Yeah, it'd be
president of the
interesting,
Fatherless
yeah.
Teachers Union, in. And one of the questions I'm going to have for her is, what are you willing to do voluntarily to look at your own deal and say what we have asked for or what we are demanding needs to be rescinded or relaxed?
Right. Well, a big thing for her too, and I'll be curious when you talk to Mary Beth about this. Look, I think they are open to making some changes. What they're going to say is we want to be paid for it, right? So you got 1 professional development day a year. Everyone agrees that that's wrong. 5, go to 10 maybe. Are you going to pay them for it? And here's the thing. A lot of people, you even hear the governor likes to say, doesn't cost, they get enough money. Well, if you're going to have a serious conversation with the teachers about things they need to do, limits on sick days, adding professional development, you're going to have to pay them. And here's the trick. Every 1% in the teacher's contract is worth about $1.4 million in taxpayer dollars. So 1%, $1.4 million. 3%, are they going to be willing to spend, what, $4 or $5 million to be able to extra every year to do this? I think that's a conversation that you're probably going to need state money to do it, and that's something that's going to have to be a conversation. No one likes to hear that, but you're not going to get the teachers to budge if you're not going to pay them.
If the contract remains intact.
Bingo. Even still.
So if you say, do you want to get in a protracted legal battle over whether or not the contract is sustainable, or do you want to make some concessions on what? And I don't know what those are.
That's right.
So this is all hypothetical.
Of
this
course.
is the stuff.
Yeah.
But there's some stuff that's not hypothetical, and some stuff that, if this is so urgent, needs to be urgently addressed. And we'll talk about that when we come back.
I am begging the State Department of Education to take over the Providence schools. Outside reviewers from Johns Hopkins had to come in here and be shocked and horrified to the point of tears about what they saw before we're all here.
More tech is not the answer. Better classroom instruction and orderly schools are the answer. It seems that the mayor and the school district have given up on those things to some degree.
By the way, do you know of any major organization in America, public or private, that suffers such a scathing review where the management team, and specifically the CEO, aren't asked to leave?
I can't think of anything.
Right. So I mean, so what the joke here is that Jorge Elorza is running, this tunnel, like he's going to be involved in this whole thing. Someone better tell him. I know he's on vacation right now, but someone better tell him when he comes back that he go sit in the corner, suck his thumb, or resign, because either somewhere along the line he's got to go, and that's not rating speech making. That's not that's not being unconstructive. This puke that's coming out of the governor's and to the commission and the commissioner's mouth right now, because all of a sudden this change agent is starting to show me that she could be tilting into status quo behavior. She has does she not have every equity and chip in the world to throw in right now?
She could do whatever
Her
she
hair
wants
should
right
be on
now.
fire. If she wants to tell the governor to jump, she should tell the governor to jump. If she wants to tell Elorza to go suck his thumb, she can tell Elorza to go suck his thumb. In 3 to 6, 9, and 12 months, she won't have
That all changes. That's right.
But if it's such one of the things that is so drastically alarming is not the test scores.
No.
It's the rats and the asbestos and the security. How can any school identified to have those problems open on September whatever?
Right. No, it's a legitimate
question.
question.
How can that happen?
Right. And if you're going to do this right now, if you want to make if you have to do something long term to fix the schools in terms of the outcomes for students, okay, fine, plan that. I'm stunned that they still haven't come out with a plan yet to say we will not let a school open, even if it's not true.
And the commissioner hasn't said that yet either.
That's right. You're right about that.
It's like, you got to be kidding me.
Right.
I talked to David Salvatore about it last night for the radio today, which you probably, or if you listen, you've heard, where I said, how can you open a school? If you have to hold a class in a locker room at the Dunkin' Donuts Center, you have to do that.
Right.
And if there's emergency money necessary, you better go get it.
That's right.
Who's kidding who here?
Right. Yeah,
and if they don't do those basic things, well, it's going to take a long time. Well, it doesn't take a long time to find rats.
That's right.
Even though I was told here last night by my guest that rats are a problem that I underestimate. Oh, I'm sorry. We've gone to Mars. Oh, well, no, I think we went to the moon. We may go to Mars. We can get rats.
Right. One would imagine that.
You can have an exterminator in the damn school, or you just say, you know what, this is rat infested. We're out.
By the way, it's the summer. They could really do it. They're not going to interrupt anything. Right.
Empty buildings all around the state.
Right.
So, I mean, really, Dan? I mean, really?
I know, it's it's disturbing.
The whole thing is disturbing, only, it's not surprising.
No.
Did anybody really read that report and go, oh my God, oh my God, the kids are unsafe, oh my God, the teachers are not empowered, oh my God, there's a rat, oh my God, did you hear there's asbestos on the 3rd floor? Did anybody do that? If they did,
the sticky trap on kids, that was tough, but you're right, you're right.
Did you go,
No, I was not stunned.
Who's kidding who? The play acting and screenplay of this thing is outrageous.
Yeah. Well, I covered the council and elementary and secondary education meeting the night of that they released this, and you sit there with a bunch of adults in a room, the same adults who have been involved in school reform for 20 years, and
so all them dudes and dudesses have to go because they're feigning surprise.
Right.
And that shows me they're full of it. Anyway, I'm going to rely on your continued good reporting on this whole thing. Not a bad time to transition into a real focus on education in Providence, huh?
So, unfortunately, bad news tends to be good news for the media business, so we're going to try to capitalize on it.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks.
Final word when we come back. Are you surprised?
I missed you.
Really? The surprise, it's just the gamesmanship in public policy, in elected life, in all of this is just hyperbolized by this crisis in the city of Providence. They knew exactly what they were getting, and you give them credit for what they did, meaning the governor and the ed commissioner, not the lying mayor who says it was his idea, not him. But I will tell you, you can't feign horror and not respond to the horror. And the immediate horror is asbestos and rats and security. And if you don't act on that, forget the teacher union contract and all that stuff. If you don't act on that first, you're full of baloney. The head of the Providence Teachers Union tomorrow, and I'll talk to you on the radio at 3 on WPRO.